I'm going to start with a little story, and it goes something like this. There was this pastor who began to notice that when he'd get up to preach his message, that there was a note in his wife's handwriting on the pulpit that had one word on it: kiss. So after a few weeks of this, he mentioned to his wife how much he appreciated her sending him a kiss before he preached his message, and how much that meant to him, and he appreciated the support. She says, "Well, I hate to tell you, sweetheart, but that's not a kiss. It stands for keep it simple, stupid." So, what does that got to do with Passover? Well, I want to start with Yeshua and the fact that I believe he kept things very simple. One of the reasons I believe this is it seemed he always had children around. There was always children around. He even says, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." And he had a young man one time with some loaves and fishes that we call it the feeding of the 5,000. But there was this little boy came to hear him teach. And I don't know about you, but I don't know of any evangelists or pastors today that are simple enough where say a fourth grader would be just dying to attend the meeting to hear the teaching. In fact, today most pastors and evangelists are so complicated that you're hard pressed as an adult to follow them. But Yeshua spoke on a level that was at a child's level, where the little children loved to be around him. And when he was teaching, they would bring their lunches and just so they could be there. So one of the reasons I think that he was able to do this is he kept everything very logical and simple. Logical in the sense that it made sense. Now, sometimes it doesn't always make sense to us today with our 20th century Western mindset. But in the first century, with the Hebraic mindset, these things are very logical and very simple to these people. They actually understood what he was saying because it was part of their life. They lived this. And so to them it was very logical and very simple. And today, if we could just get our minds into that first century Hebraic mindset, we find that Scripture is very simple and easy to understand. One of the things I say is, if no matter what your theology, if you can't explain it to a fourth grader and have that fourth grader understand it, you might want to take a look at your theology, because there's a good fair chance it's wrong. Now, I'm not saying it is, because there's a few concepts in the Scriptures that are fairly complicated. But for the most part, a fourth grader should understand it. It shouldn't be too complicated. Now, one of the things we notice is that there are in the subject material that we're getting ready to do right now, that there are as many interpretations as there are people to make them. Which basically says this: if you don't agree with something that I'm teaching here in this teaching, that's cool. You have just another view. I don't know that any one view is totally correct. That I don't know that maybe any of them are all totally wrong. Well, yeah, there might be some that are totally wrong, but I don't know that anybody has a total handle on things. But I'm going to give you my view in this teaching, why I think what I believe is correct. Other people will do the same thing. They'll present their view and why they think their view is correct. And then it's up to us to take all these different views of what's going on, and we have to figure out which one makes sense to us. and which one we want to go with. I don't think this is something that is so important. In other words, if you get this wrong, it's not going to cause you to go to hell when you die. It's not something that's, but it's interesting, and it may impact on how you live your life. But that's about all. Let's start off and talk about the crucifixion, because that's the crux of the whole thing. What happened that Passover week? It all keys on where you put the crucifixion, because everything else kind of fits around that. You figure back from the crucifixion and forward from the crucifixion, and then that's where you figure out what your week looks like. And there are 4 primary views. Now, for some of these views, the way they work it is they say, well, the Jews had this thing where they would treat a half a day as a full day. And so if there's even a part of a day, we can count that as a whole day. My only thing on that is that's not a Jewish thing. That's just a human thing. Everybody does that. We do that today. We do it without even thinking about it. It's not something unique to any people group. The example I like to use is if you were to go, say, to Disney World, and you were to get there, say, late in the day, and maybe you meant to get there in the morning, but something happened, you didn't get there until, say, 9 o'clock at night. And so you took your family in, and you spent a couple hours looking around, let's say on a Tuesday night. And then you left and you went back to your hotel and you got some sleep. And the next morning, which is the day you're going to leave to go to the next city you're going to go to or whatever, but you decide to stop by Disney World again. So you get to Disney World about 10 o'clock and you're there until maybe 12, 1, 2 o'clock, and then you have to leave to go wherever you got to go next. So so you end up spending 2 hours one day and 3 or 4 hours the next day. So when you get home and you're telling the story of what happened, it would be very natural for you to say, yeah, we did this, and then we spent 2 days at Disney World. Well, you really didn't spend 2 entire days at Disney World. In fact, you probably only spent 6 hours total between the 2 days, but you were there on 2 different days. So you would say, well, we got 2 days. We spent 2 days at Disney World. And we do stuff like that all the time. And everybody does it. Every culture, that's just people just do that. So that's not a particularly interesting. What am I trying to say? That's not necessarily a good argument for something, in my opinion. Let's start by then talking about the 4 different views, the primary views that occur as far as when the crucifixion took place. One is that he was crucified on Friday. So this is the view that Catholicism takes. The problem I have with this view is, I don't know about a 4th grader being able to do this, but I can't figure out how to get 3 days and 3 nights. If you bury him on Friday and he's coming out of the grave on Sunday, how you get 3 days and 3 nights out of that. I have heard that explained. I've heard hour-long messages on how that is calculated, and I'll be honest, I'm a pretty bright boy. IQ around 140. I'm not stupid by any means, but I'll tell you what, 10 minutes into that lecture, I'm checking out because I'm lost. I'm gone. It's already gained altitude as it comes towards me. I do not understand how they make that one work. Then there's the Thursday. He's buried on Thursday. Now, I will admit, I could actually follow this one. When this is being taught, I could actually make this work. I could follow the person through it from beginning to end. Although I will say it doesn't make enough sense to me to where I can turn around and repeat it. I don't know that without some detailed notes if I could actually teach this one, which basically means that a 4th grader probably isn't going to be able to wrap their brains around it too easily. So neither one of these, in my opinion, follow the KISS principle. Then we have two more. One is Wednesday, and the other one is what I call Wednesday plus. These are the two views. This, by the way, is the basic view that I was raised with as a Baptist. We were raised with the Wednesday plus view. By this, you can guess that I'm probably going to go with just the Wednesday one. So let's take a look at these a little more in detail. Starting with, if he is crucified on Wednesday, we back that up. We find out that he probably came into the city because he rides into Jerusalem. He probably comes in on the Shabbat or Saturday, and then, and along at the same time that he comes in the gate, there is a lamb that is brought in from the sheep stables, which we think were probably in Bethlehem, most likely. And this is where the lamb that was spotless and without blemish, where they'd go get him, and the priest would bring him back and bring him into the gate of the city, and then they'd walk him up to Temple Mount, and then he would be examined for 4 days. That was the way it worked. The lamb was examined for 4 days. Well, Yeshua comes in at the same time, and just a real quick look at this chart, the yellow on Saturday is his entry, and the next 4 days you see there in green, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that's the inspection time. That's when he's being inspected. So let's take a quick look at those days, see what happened. On Sunday, this is where he cleanses the temple. He heals sick. In the evening, he goes back to Bethany. And then on Monday, this is where he curses the fig tree. He spends the rest of the day in the temple teaching. He talks about the great commandment during this time. And when he leaves the temple, this is the Matthew 24 passages where he talks about what's going to happen in the future. He teaches about the 10 virgins, the coming judgment. And it's at this time that Judas is contacting the authorities. So he's going to them and seeing if he can make a little money on the side, I guess. On Tuesday, this is where we have the withered fig tree, and then he's back to Jerusalem with the Passover meal. Yeshua did not do any public teaching that day. It was strictly with his disciples. Okay, at this point we're going to get a little more detailed. Tuesday night, the sun was set roughly around 6 o'clock in the evening. Once the sun set, they would have had their meal. This is a meal we call the Last Supper. Now, a lot of people say that he actually ate the Passover meal at this time. That is absolutely impossible. There's no way he could have done that. We'll see in a minute here why that would be the case. I discussed this with someone who's way more versed in the traditions of the time than I am. And he told me that basically they had, and I guess still have, in some groups, something called the Haggadah. And that's the part we know as the Last Supper. And it's basically a practice routine. They take the Passover Seder so seriously that they want to make sure they got it right. It's kind of like we do a lot of times when you're going to have a wedding. You have a wedding rehearsal, where you run through the wedding so that when the actual wedding takes place, everybody knows what they're supposed to do and you don't have a lot of mess ups. So that's what the Haggadah is. It's the Passover rehearsal. So they're going to go through the whole thing just to make sure that everybody knows exactly what's what's going to happen, and so they make sure they got everything. And so that was probably the meal that he had with them as he went through. So it wasn't the actual Passover meal, not the Passover Seder, which was going to happen on Passover, but this was the rehearsal dinner, and this is the day of preparation. So this is the day before the actual Passover. You're 24 hours ahead of it. So we have the sun goes down, and they have the Passover rehearsal meal, and in there he does some teaching, and it's called the Last Supper. One of the reasons this could not have been the Passover, it's mentioned in a couple different places, but the verses I'm going to reference here are in John chapter 13. This is where he says, they're saying, who is going to do this, when he talks about being betrayed. And so he says to Judas, go buy those things we have need of against the feast. Now he's talking about the feast of Passover. And so he's telling Judas, because he's the one that has the money, you need to go out and buy what we're going to need for the feast. Now he didn't. It's not what he was going to do, obviously, but the disciples thought that's where he was going. So they didn't find anything strange that Judas got up and left, because they assumed that he was going to go start making preparations for the next evening for the actual feast, to buy the different things they were going to need for that. So late that night, Wednesday, they go to Gethsemane, and Yeshua is arrested at that time, and he's taken to the court of the Jews. And this is when the denial of Peter takes place. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning. Yeshua is taken to Pilate. Judas kills himself, commits suicide. And that morning, Yeshua is tried in the Roman court. Mid-morning, Yeshua is sentenced and whipped. Now, Pilate says about Yeshua, I find no fault in him. It's interesting that up on the Temple Mount at this precise moment, the priest is saying those very words about the lamb that has now been being examined for 4 days, and the priest says, I find no fault in him. After 4 days of examination of Yeshua, Pilate says, I find no fault in him. Okay? So these things now are beginning to happen in sequence with what's going on. Well, they have been. So Yeshua comes in the gate with the lamb. He goes through the examination in concert with the lamb on Temple Mount. They are both pronounced free of any fault at the same time. And then roughly at about 12 o'clock, he's crucified. Now, up on Temple Mount, once the lamb was sacrificed, the priest would say, I thirst, and they would bring him some water, because the priest during this whole process has not had anything to eat or drink, because he didn't want to risk becoming unclean. So now he would say, I thirst, they'd bring him some water. Okay? Now, the lamb has already, the throat has been cut, but it takes a while for the lamb to actually die. He doesn't die instantly. And Yeshua then says, I thirst, and of course that's where they don't bring him water, they bring him vinegar. And then shortly thereafter, Yeshua says, it is finished, or it is accomplished. At that moment in time, as Yeshua then, he says, gives up the ghost, as Yeshua dies, the lamb on Temple Mount also dies. But just before Yeshua dies, he says, it is finished. And the priest then, as the lamb dies, says, it is finished. Okay? And so at the ninth hour, 3 p.m., the sacrifice is complete. It's interesting to note that on the cross, Yeshua was the sacrifice, but Yeshua also was the priest. He played both roles. On Temple Mount, there was a lamb and a priest. So the sacrifice is complete at the ninth hour. This is about 3 p.m. Okay? So then they take him down and bury him. Okay? Now, the interesting thing here is it says that day was the preparation of the Sabbath drew on. So the Sabbath is the high Sabbath of Passover is coming. And they need to get him into the sepulcher before sundown, because they have to be clean in order to eat Passover. They have to be clean in order to eat Passover. And in Leviticus, it says if you touch a dead body, then you are unclean until the next sundown. You are to be considered unclean until the next sundown. So if the sun went down on Wednesday and they were burying him after sundown, they would be touching his dead body and they would be unclean until the next sundown. Well, the Passover Seder is getting ready to start like right then. So they would not be able to go home and have Passover with their families because they would be unclean. So they got to get him in the grave before sundown so that as they bury him, they become unclean, but they're only unclean until sundown. So, however long that is, minutes or however minutes that is, then when the sun goes down, now they're clean and they can go eat Passover with their family. So on our chart here, we're through the yellow and the green, and now we're up to this blue that you see there, and this is when he's in the grave. Okay? He's going to be in the grave, and then on Sunday we have first fruits. The Feast of First Fruits is there. So now we're going to look at those, the end there, the in the grave part and first fruits. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, Yeshua goes to paradise. He's there 3 days and 3 nights. And I believe in 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours. You know why? Because a fourth grader can wrap their brain around that. That is real simple. There's no fancy calculations. There's no treating a half a day as a full day. And it's very simple. It's logical, it's simple, and that's the primary reason I like this particular view. Okay? And I mentioned here, we say sometimes Yeshua went to hell. Yeah, well, he did, but he wasn't tormented, he was preaching. So now we come to resurrection, and there's 2 views of the Wednesday burial. Remember, there's 2 views. There's Wednesday and Wednesday, what I call Wednesday plus. So those two views then, as you go 3 days and 3 nights from the burial on Wednesday just before sundown, so that they can eat the Passover on Thursday, is he rose sometime between sundown the 7th day and dawn on the 1st day. Now this is the traditional view. It's somewhere after sundown and before dawn on the 7th day of Saturday, 1st day of Sunday, that somewhere in there he came out of the grave. The other view is he came out of the grave prior to sundown on the 7th day. Okay, let's take a look at these. There's a problem with the first one, because it says he was buried and he rose again the 3rd day. He rose on the 3rd day. So if you take a Wednesday, then all of a sudden you can't have perfect days and nights if you're going to have him out of the grave on Sunday, because if you do, and you count that through, and you say, well, he went into the grave just before sundown on Wednesday, then from just before sundown on Wednesday to just before sundown on Thursday is one day, and then from just before sundown on Thursday to just before sundown on Friday is 2 days, and just before sundown on Thursday to just before sundown on Friday is 3 days. And then if you kick over into just after sundown to the first day of the week, that is day 4. So you actually have him being raised on the 4th day, not the 3rd day. So that's my issue with that one. It doesn't work. And yet that's the view that I was actually taught. I grew up with in the grave Wednesday night, out of the grave Sunday morning. The problem is when you do the math there, even a 4th grader can do the math there, you have him coming out of the grave on the 4th day, not the 3rd day. And that's not what is stated here. He rose the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. Now that's the Old Testament. The Scriptures is the Torah. Okay, so he's referencing back to that. According to that, he would be raised on a 3rd day. So, the other view is prior to sundown on the 7th day. Okay, and if you look at this, if you go the same thing I just did, so you go just before sundown on Wednesday to just before sundown on Thursday to just before sundown on Friday to just before sundown on Saturday, that's when he would have come out of the grave. He came out of the grave on the Sabbath. Now, I'm aware that people say he was raised first fruits from among the dead. We're going to fix that because that's real easy. That is absolutely the truth. But he was also raised Lord of the Sabbath. So he comes out of the grave on Saturday as Lord of the Sabbath. And then the key to the whole thing happens on Sunday morning. You got Mary in the garden. She is there, and we all know the story. She thinks can't find Yeshua. She sees who she thinks is the gardener. She says, what have you done with him? He says her name, and of course she starts for him. She is going to give him a big bear hug. What does he say? He says, touch me not, for I am yet not ascended to my Father, but rather go to my brother and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and to my God, your God. Why was he ascending? I thought he didn't do that for 40 days yet. Well, the key is back in the Old Testament. We're not going to take time to go there now. I'll let you go read it for yourself. But it's the Feast of First Fruits. About 9 o'clock, the 3rd hour, which means the 3rd hour after if sunrise is at 6, then the 3 hours from that is 9 o'clock. Or whatever that is. They didn't have clocks back then, so it could have been 8:20 for all we know. But at roughly 9 o'clock, at the 3rd hour, when their sundial or whatever they were using to measure time said that 3 hours had gone by, a priest would take a sheaf of barley, and he would go into the Holy of Holies, and he would wave this barley in the temple. It's called a wave offering. Now he had to do it. So why did he have to do it? Well, he did it because God said to do it. But why? Well, we really don't know. God really doesn't tell us why he said to do it. He just said to do it. And this had to be done on the first day of the week, following the Passover. So whatever the Passover was, if the Passover was on Wednesday, then they would do this that Sunday. If it was on Friday, they did. In this particular case, the Passover was on Thursday, with the scenario we're using. So that Sunday at the 3rd hour, first day of the week, 3rd hour, that's when they would do the first fruits. Now, it's not so much a feast, because when you think of a feast, you think of a lot of people getting together and having a party. This was just one guy taking some barley, going in, waving it back and forth, and then walking out, and it's done. Not a whole lot to it. Doesn't take very long, but it has to be done. Now, going back to Mary in the garden, I've heard it preached sometimes that what happened there is that Yeshua actually said to her, "Don't cling to me." Well, there's no way that could be what was said there. In fact, I think he said, "Don't touch me," and I think he didn't just say it. I think he screamed it at her because there was a lot of stake. Because here's the problem. The reason you had to do first fruits is in the Torah. It says if the priest is unclean or for whatever reason this first feast of first fruits doesn't take place, then the sacrifice will not be accepted for you. What sacrifice? Well, the sacrifice just took place, Passover. So you have the Passover, the sacrifice of the lamb, but first fruits is kind of like the ribbon and the bow that goes on that present, if you will. It ties it all up. It completes it. So we talk about the death, burial, and resurrection. Actually, it's the death, burial, resurrection, and first fruits. Because without first fruits, the death, burial, and resurrection count for nothing. So that's how I know Mary wasn't clinging to him, because if she was clinging to him, the gig was already up. Okay, the whole death, burial, resurrection had just gone down the tubes. So I know for a fact she never actually came into contact with him. How do we know that? Because he ascended. Now, how do we know he ascended? Because just a few hours later, this Yeshua, who is, "Don't touch me, don't touch me," we find he's all of a sudden all touchy-feely. He's saying things like, "Here, put your finger here where the nail went, and touch me here, touch my side." So he's good. He's all touchy-feely. Touch me all you want, and prove to yourselves that I'm real. But at 6 o'clock in the morning, he was, "Don't touch me." So he went and he became first fruits for us on the first day of the week. So he was raised Lord of the Sabbath so that he could, and now being raised, he could then go as the priest, the totally clean priest, okay, because he hasn't been in contact with anybody or anything for that whole 3 days and 3 nights. He goes as the priest into heaven as the priest that does the wave offering. Now, what did he wave? I'm not even going to go there. There are so many different opinions as to what that is. Everybody has a different opinion as to what that is. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter. The point here is that he did it. And he comes back, and now he can be touched. And then 40 days later, he actually ascends for a whole different reason. Okay, so he stays on earth for 40 days, then he ascends. When he does ascend, he takes all the old covenant saints with him out of paradise. Basically, that's all the saints have died prior to that time. 10 days after that, they're meeting, and this is where we have the giving of the Holy Spirit. So 10 days later, the Holy Ghost comes. That's known as Shavuot, and that's found in Acts 2. Now, this is the second first fruits. There's the first fruits of barley. That's the first fruits, and then Shavuot is the second first fruits, and that's the first fruits for wheat. Now, how do we actually get to that? Well, we start with the first fruits. That's day one, and it's called the counting of the Omer, and we count 7 weeks of 7 days. That's 49 days. So if you start on the first day of the week and you count seven times, you're going to end up on the 7th day of the week, on Shabbat. And that's 49 days. You add 1 day to that, you get 50 days, and that's Shavuot, otherwise known as Pentecost. Penta means 5, so Pentecost, it's the 50th day. And that's the wheat, the first fruits of wheat, called that 50th day. And that completes the whole sequence from the his coming into the gate, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the first fruits, the giving of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, and that completes the whole thing. A lot of people don't realize, but Pentecost is actually tied to the Passover and the resurrection, because the resurrection is completed by the first fruits, and then it's 50 days from that point forward until you get to Shavuot. So it's that 50 days, that counting the Omer links those two together. So the whole thing starts when the lamb comes in the gate. It ends 50 days after the first fruits, with the second first fruits. And that's all part of that whole part. When we talk about the spring feast, that's what we're talking about, that whole sequence of events. Now, we've been looking at one chart that I've included with it, and I've also included two other charts. These all show the same exact thing. They all are the Wednesday to Saturday, showing exactly how that works. There's three of them. You could pick the one that makes the most sense to you. But they all basically are showing the same thing. So that concludes this teaching on Passover for this year.